Have you heard this story? The night began with a warm wind drifting across the abandoned outskirts of the town, and the kind of quiet that made even insects hesitate. Marcus Hale felt that quiet settle on his shoulders as he stepped out of his truck and looked at the long-forgotten research facility rising like a concrete skeleton from the weeds. The clouds above moved in heavy layers that hid the moon and turned every shape into a shadow of a shadow. He tasted dust in the air, and for a moment wondered why he had agreed to take this job alone. The building had been shut down for 20 years, but the documents his employer delivered claimed something valuable had been left behind in one of the underground vaults. Marcus had done plenty of retrieval work, yet something about this place hummed with a weight he could not explain. As he pushed open the rusted side door, he heard its echo vanish into the dark like the building swallowed the sound whole. Inside, the air felt colder and carried an old metallic scent, the sort that clings to forgotten machines. His flashlight swept across peeling walls, broken screens, and loose wires drooping like dead vines. He could hear his own breathing bouncing softly through the corridor. He told himself the pressure in his chest was just nerves, but a quiet voice inside insisted that this place remembered things and did not like being disturbed. Marcus moved deeper, following the blueprint instructions on the small tablet in his pocket. Occasionally he whispered to himself short check-ins designed to keep his mind sharp. The silence pushed back with every word. After 10 minutes, he reached the first stairwell leading down. A faint sound drifted up, like a faraway hum that rose and fell. It reminded him of a heartbeat muffled beneath stone. He hesitated, gripping the railing. "Don't be dramatic," he muttered. But his fingers felt cold, as if the metal drank the warmth from his skin. The humming grew slightly stronger as he descended step by step. He imagined the unknown vault below pulsing like some creature waiting patiently in the dark. His boots scraped against the concrete, a rhythm that kept him grounded even while his thoughts spiraled. At the bottom of the stairs, the hallway widened, and his flashlight revealed deep claw-like scratches along the walls. They weren't animal marks, the spacing was too deliberate. He leaned close and touched one groove. Dust flaked away, revealing clean concrete beneath, as if something had carved it recently. Marcus dropped his hand and felt his heartbeat quicken. Focus on the job, he told himself, but the humming had grown loud enough to vibrate in his jaw. Ahead stood a large reinforced door, sealed shut, but faint light leaked from its edges. His instructions said this was Vault 3, the place he needed to access. But no power should have remained in the facility, and no light should have existed behind that door. Marcus approached slowly, feeling the air warm with each step. He reached the control panel, which flickered weakly. When he pressed the override key, the light surged, and the door creaked open, releasing a wave of heated air that struck him like a living breath. He swallowed hard. Inside the vault sat a circular chamber glowing with a dim red light pulsing like a heartbeat. In the center stood a vertical column of glass filled with shifting dark fluid that stirred as if responding to his presence. Marcus felt a deep instinct scream at him to leave immediately. But he forced himself forward, drawn by the strange pull of the container. As he reached the edge of the platform, he heard a whisper. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but the sound grew clearer, forming broken words inside his skull. Marcus clenched his jaw, backing away. The shadows along the chamber walls began to ripple, though no wind moved. Something in the fluid pressed against the glass, leaving a faint outline like a hand. The whisper sharpened into a single command, spoken with many voices layered together. "Stay." Marcus stumbled and turned toward the exit, but the vault door slammed shut behind him, trapping him in red darkness as the humming rose into a deep, resonant roar that shook the floor. The chamber vibrated as though the whole building held its breath. Marcus pressed his palms against the closed vault door, trying the manual release, but it refused to budge. A pulse of heat rolled across the room, forcing sweat down his temples. His flashlight flickered under the pressure of the unseen force surrounding him. He steadied himself, forcing slow breaths. Panic never solved anything, he told himself, but the words rang hollow. The whisper returned, swirling in his head, soft but sharp, like cold fingers touching his thoughts. He turned back toward the glass column at the center of the vault, feeling the pull of those voices tug at his focus. The dark fluid inside churned faster, now swirling in spirals that revealed brief flashes of something pale drifting like a submerged shape, half formed and half awake. Marcus tried to ignore the instinct clawing at his spine, but the more he looked, the more he felt that whatever lived inside the column was aware of him, completely aware. He stepped closer despite himself, studying the structure. The glass rose from thick metal plates covered in old warning labels. The console beside it had been smashed long ago, wires exposed like veins. Marcus slowly reached out to touch the glass, but stopped inches before contact as a soft thud echoed from within. A second thud followed, like a slow, methodical knock. "That's enough," he whispered, backing away. He searched the chamber for another exit and spotted a service hatch high along the wall. It looked narrow, but possibly reachable if he could stack some of the old crates scattered near the corner. The humming behind him shifted in tone, rising into something almost melodic, a sound that made his skin crawl. Marcus moved fast, dragging crates into position. As he climbed the makeshift tower, the whispers grew louder, filling the chamber with fragments of broken sentences urging him to stop. He ignored them, focusing on each careful movement upward. When he reached the hatch, he pried it open, releasing a burst of stale, cold air. The moment he pulled himself inside, the whispers snapped to silence, leaving only the fading echo of the humming below. He crawled through the narrow duct, feeling the metal vibrate faintly beneath him, as though the creature below thrashed in frustration. When he dropped into the hallway on the other side, he landed hard, but relief washed through him. He stood shaking off dust and adjusted his gear. But as he prepared to move, the overhead lights flickered to life with a harsh electric buzz. The entire hallway illuminated in a pale, clinical white he had not seen upon his entry. Marcus swore under his breath. There was no power here, no working circuits, so why were the lights responding to him now? A distant metallic clang echoed down the corridor. He froze, listening. Another clang followed, louder, accompanied by a dragging noise, like something heavy sliding across concrete. Marcus slowly reached for his handgun, keeping his breath shallow. He moved down the hall, each step deliberate. His inner voice repeated a single line: "Keep control, keep control." The dragging grew clearer, and he realized it came from around the corner ahead. Marcus held the gun steady, rounding the bend. The hallway was empty, but the floor bore long wet streaks glistening under the bright light. A smell hit him, then sharp and bitter like burning chemicals. The streaks led toward the direction of the old biomedical wing. Marcus debated turning back, but the exit lay past that wing, and staying here was not an option. He followed the trail, his nerves tightening as the temperature around him dropped. He could see his breath now drifting in faint clouds. When he reached the entrance to the biomedical wing, the doors stood partially open, bending inward, as if forced by immense pressure. Inside, the ceiling panels hung at odd angles, wires swaying. A strange quiet filled the area, thicker than before. Marcus pushed through, scanning the room. Then he heard it. A low gurgling exhale from somewhere deep in the wing. He raised his gun, moving toward the sound. A figure staggered into view, covered in dark fluid dripping from its limbs. Its face was obscured by a thick layer of the substance, and its movements were jerky, as though its joints bent incorrectly. Marcus aimed and demanded, "Show me your hands." The figure tilted its head with a slow, unnatural creak. Then it spoke with the exact whispering voice from the vault, layered and echoing inside the room. "Stay." Marcus fired. The shot rang out, but the figure dissolved into a splash of liquid, hitting the floor like a collapsing wave, leaving behind only the whisper that slithered into the silence. His heartbeat thundered as he backed away. Whatever he had released from the vault was no longer confined. It was moving freely, changing shape, inhabiting the building. And it wanted him. Marcus ran through the biomedical wing, keeping his pistol raised, while cold air pushed against him in erratic gusts. The corridors felt longer than before, stretching unnaturally, like the building itself had begun to distort. Shadows slithered along the corners, drifting like smoke, though the air was still. His mind churned with questions, but fear drowned most of them. He knew one thing for certain: the entity had broken containment, and each minute it grew stronger, feeding off the building, the dark, the isolation, or maybe off him. He heard footsteps behind him, rapid and sharp. Marcus spun, lifting the weapon. Nothing. Only the echo bouncing along the walls, mocking him. He pushed forward, determined to reach the surface level and escape, but every path felt unfamiliar. "You are not lost," the voice whispered inside his head. "You are being guided." He clenched his jaw, ignoring the words. But as he turned down another hall, he found himself standing before a sealed bulkhead door he was certain had not existed before. A glowing panel beside it read "Observation Wing." This wasn't on the blueprint. The panel blinked once, then opened on its own, flooding the hall with a cold blue light. Marcus knew better than to step inside anything the entity invited him into, but he also sensed the routes behind him shifting, closing. He felt cornered, forced to move deeper. The room beyond was a vast chamber lined with glass observation tanks. Most were broken, their reinforced panels shattered outward. Thick black stains clung to the floors beneath them. Marcus moved slowly, flashlight sweeping through the eerie stillness. He approached one intact tank. Inside floated a cluster of pale limbs suspended in a jelly-like solution. They were human, but fused together in unnatural ways, as if grown, not assembled. The sight twisted his stomach. A metallic thump sounded behind him. He spun, but the chamber remained empty. His breath hitched. A second thump came, louder, vibrating through the floor. He turned to the far end of the room, where a massive containment door stood trembling. The thumping grew in pace, each strike more violent than the last. Something enormous pounded from the other side. Marcus backed away, aiming his pistol, though he knew it would be useless. The door bulged inward with a warped metallic groan. Then a voice slid into his mind, calmer than before. "Do not fear what you woke. Fear what kept me asleep." Marcus felt a cold realization bloom inside him. This thing had not been created here. It had been imprisoned here. Before he could react, the containment door ruptured outward, sending shards of metal flying. Marcus ducked behind a workstation as a blast of freezing air swept across the chamber. He shielded his face, feeling the sting of razor-sharp dust. When he looked up, he saw a towering silhouette emerging from the breach, fluid dripping from its limbs, hitting the floor in sizzling puddles. Its shape flickered, shifting between forms, never settling. Marcus felt an overwhelming wave of pressure crash against his thoughts, like the creature's presence alone was pushing into his mind. He fired repeatedly, the shots tearing through the shifting form, but causing no harm. The creature turned its faceless head toward him, and the whispers grew louder, swelling into a chorus. "You freed us. We will free you." Marcus ran. The chamber lights burst one by one as he sprinted past them. Black fluid splashed across the floor, spreading like reaching hands. The creature's steps reverberated through the metal walkways, slower than expected, but impossibly certain, like it knew every path he would take. Marcus reached the far exit, slamming his shoulder into it, until the door gave way. He burst into another hallway, gasping for breath. But this hall was different. The air felt heavy with heat. And ahead of him, the walls glowed faintly with shifting veins of red light, pulsing in rhythm with the humming he had heard in the vault. He whispered to himself, "This place is alive, and it wants me inside it." Marcus forced himself forward, even as the pulsing lights along the walls brightened with each step. The corridor bent unnaturally left, then right, twisting like a living intestine. The heat thickened, making sweat form instantly along his back. He wiped his forehead, breathing shallowly. His thoughts felt sluggish, as though the air itself pressed against his skull. He could feel the presence of the entity growing stronger, the whispers circulating around him like invisible currents. Ahead, the corridor opened into a massive circular chamber he had never seen on any map. The floor pulsed beneath a thin layer of dark membrane glistening with wet sheen. Tendrils ran from the walls into the center, where a platform rose supporting a machinery cluster of pipes and screens. The screens flickered between old camera feed static and symbols he did not recognize. As Marcus stepped inside, the door behind him sealed with a wet organic sound. He reached for it, but found only warm, smooth surface, no handle, no lock, just a wall. "Okay," he muttered, steadying himself, "let's find another way out." He approached the central machinery. It hummed faintly, but not with the same cadence as the creature. The hum felt older, more mechanical. And then he saw them, the bodies. 7 figures sat slumped around the base of the machine, each in tattered uniforms bearing the facility's old insignia. Their skin was gray and dried, stretched across skeletal frames. It looked like they had been dead for decades. But their faces were frozen in expressions of terror. Marcus leaned closer, examining one of the uniforms. A name tag read Dr. K. Horland. He recognized the name from the files. Horland had led the containment team. His report had claimed the threat was neutralized, but the fear twisted across his face said otherwise. Marcus searched the machine console. A cracked display flickered to life, showing a message looping endlessly. Containment breach. Entity adaptive. Facility compromised. Do not engage. He felt the dread settle deep inside his gut. Too late for that, he whispered. A deep rumble echoed through the chamber. The tendrils along the walls began retracting, slithering into the floor. The ground shook violently, and Marcus steadied himself on the console. A tunnel began opening on the far end of the room, the membrane pulling back to reveal a long descent lined with organic ribs and metal supports twisted together. The voice returned clearer than ever inside his head. "Come down. Know what they hid from you." Marcus clenched his fists, fighting the mental pull. But the heat, the pressure, and the rising pulse in the walls all pushed him toward the tunnel, as if the facility were guiding him deeper. He moved cautiously, gripping his pistol, though he knew it would do nothing. The descent twisted downward, illuminated by dim, throbbing lines. His thoughts wavered between fear and a strange compulsion to understand what the entity truly was. At the bottom, he entered a cavernous space, half natural rock, half constructed metal. The ceiling dripped with condensation that hit the floor in slow, heavy drops. In the center stood a massive cocoon-like structure pulsing with crimson light. Marcus approached slowly, feeling his instincts scream, yet unable to turn back. The cocoon opened with a soft tearing sound, revealing a hollow interior lined with shifting patterns. Inside, he saw brief flashes like memories not his own. Creatures forming worlds, collapsing, the entity drifting between them, feeding on energy, not life itself, but something deeper. He saw a team of scientists discovering it dormant underground long before the facility existed. He saw their attempts to study it turning to fear as it awakened. Then he heard the final message, not whispered but spoken clearly, as if the entity stood directly beside him. "You woke me. You freed me. Now you join me." The cocoon began to close around him. Marcus fired wildly, but the shots melted into the membrane like raindrops into mud. He pushed against the closing walls, struggling, desperate, but the material clung to his arms, pulling him inside. The chamber trembled as if the entire facility responded to the entity's awakening. Marcus screamed as the membrane sealed, fully leaving him in complete darkness. Inside the void, he felt his thoughts unraveling piece by piece as the entity pressed into his mind, searching, reshaping, absorbing. He fought, but the pressure was overwhelming, draining every spark of resistance. He felt himself fading. Marcus drifted in darkness, no longer certain whether he floated or simply existed inside a void without direction. Thoughts flickered like sparks, but each one dimmed before fully forming. He tried to remember his name, but the memory slipped away, replaced by echoes of alien visions. The entity moved through him, studying him, peeling back layers of memory, emotion, identity. But something within Marcus survived. a stubborn core that refused to dissolve. In that faint ember, he found a moment of clarity enough to ask a question not aloud but inward. Why me? The void shuddered. The presence shifted, answering not with words, but with a sense of inevitability. Because you opened the door. Because you listened. Because you are hollow enough to fill. Marcus felt rage ignite inside him. He pushed against the entity's influence, forcing fragments of his will to fuse back together. A jolt of pain shot through the void, and he sensed the entity recoil slightly, surprised. He seized the opportunity, forcing himself to focus. Images of the facility flashed in his mind: the vault, the tanks, the dead researchers, the realization that the entity had weakened during decades of imprisonment. It was powerful, but not invincible, not yet. Marcus clung to that thought, expanding it, building it into a lifeline. The entity sensed his resistance and surged forward, trying to smother it. The pressure crushed against him, but his anger held firm. He whispered into the void a single statement. I am not yours. The darkness cracked. A thin line of light pierced through, as if the cocoon around him had split. Marcus pushed toward it, feeling the membrane tear away from his limbs. Suddenly he fell crashing onto solid ground, gasping, as the heat of the chamber overwhelmed him. He lay inside the lower cavern once more, but the cocoon behind him writhed, violently collapsing inward. The entity screeched, a layered cry that shook dust from the ceiling. Marcus forced himself up, his legs trembling. He sprinted toward the tunnel, stumbling but driven by raw desperation. The walls pulsed erratically, as though the facility itself was collapsing with the creature's weakening state. He reached the main chamber, climbing the passage as tendrils lashed out from the walls, swiping at him. One wrapped around his ankle, but he kicked violently, breaking free. He burst into the machinery room, gasping for air. The 7 corpses sat motionless around the core, but something about the machinery had changed. The console emitted a constant warning tone, and a message flashed. Emergency purge available. Initiate YN. Marcus slammed his hand onto the panel, selecting Y. The entire facility thundered as massive metal plates shifted deep below. A countdown began, echoing through every corridor. 30 seconds to purge. 29. 28. Marcus sprinted toward the sealed door, but it dissolved into liquid membrane, then opened, releasing a blast of cold air. The purge had begun, disconnecting the organic corruption from the remaining structure. He ran through the corridor as lights exploded overhead. Behind him, he heard the entity screaming, twisting, trying to reform. He reached the stairwell, climbing 2 steps at a time. The ground shook violently, the pulse of the entity fading into distorted echoes. 10 seconds. 9. 8. Marcus burst through the final hallway toward the exit. The side door he had entered through earlier hung open, swaying in the hot wind outside. 3 seconds. 2. 1. A brilliant white light erupted behind him, followed by a shockwave of heat that threw him onto the ground outside. He rolled, coughing, as dust billowed into the night sky. The facility collapsed inward, as if imploding into nothingness, leaving only a crater of smoking debris. Marcus lay on his back, staring at the sky, trembling, his thoughts scattered, but his mind still his own. The whispers had vanished, replaced by blessed silence. Hours later, as dawn crept across the horizon, he stood beside the ruins, feeling the weight of what he had survived. The entity was gone, or so he hoped, yet a faint ache lingered in the back of his mind like a scar. He whispered to himself, whatever that thing was, I hope this place is its grave. But as the wind shifted, he heard a faint rhythmic hum rising from beneath the rubble, repeating in a slow, steady pulse, like a heartbeat waking far too soon. Leave a like and subscribe, so it will be easier for us to continue releasing this kind of content.